Okay, so welcome everybody. My name is Przemysław Kazienko. I'm from here, from Amognition Research Group at this university. So that's my great pleasure to introduce Professor Lisa Feldman Barrett. And I will have to say that this seminar is going to be recorded and will be available online on YouTube and also at the websites of the Interdisciplinary Scientific Seminar. So that this talk, it's a part of the series of lectures within this Interdisciplinary Scientific Seminar, which has been co-organized for some time now by the Wrocław hub of Academia Europaea, which is also the founder of today's event. So that's the series of open meetings with world-renowned speakers. So that's, here we are. And we have Professor Lisa Feldman Barrett. She's a neuropsychologist, that's important, neuro and psychologist. Distinguished professor at Northeastern University, what is seen here, but she's also affiliated at Harvard Medical School in Boston, both are in Boston, Massachusetts. She's, of course, the fellow of so many prestige organizations, including American Academy of Art and Sciences, Royal Society of Canada, Society of Experimental Psychologists, Guggenheim Fellow, and many, many others. And it is also pretty interesting that she is also the leader of Interdisciplinary Affective Science Laboratory at this Northeastern University. And I have to admit that we have another professor from this laboratory, namely Professor Karen Quigley. Raise your hand, Karen. Yes, so here in front of me. So Lisa has published lots of scientific papers. You can find them online, but also two books. These two books have been translated into Polish. So that's one of these books. So there's the Polish second edition of that. So the English version, it is How Emotions Are Made, The Secret Life of the Brain. And she also, and the second book, it is 7.5 lessons about the brain. And here is its Polish version. It's an e-book version. You can buy it. Yeah, it's cheaper, simply cheaper. But the Polish title for this, it is not about these 7 lessons. It is, but it is Mózg jest nie do myślenia. The brain is not for thinking. So there's the Polish title of this book, including the 7.5 groundbreaking lessons about the brain. So now I would like only to maybe to quote Daniel Gilbert, the psychologist at Harvard University, from this cover of her first book, brilliant and original by the deepest thinker on the topic since Darwin. So that's his message. So my personal experience with Lisa was I heard her at MIT a couple of years ago, and during her keynote lectures, she gave that there. And after the lecture, so I thought to myself, wow. So I wish you also experienced this wow effect also today. So let's dive into the secrets of the brain, but not any brain, not of human brain. The secrets of your own brain. So thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Lisa Feldman Barrett. Here we are.
Dzień dobry. I practiced. It's a real honor and a pleasure to be here with you today. And in particular, I want to thank our hosts, Professor Kazienko and Professor Saganowski and the wonderful lab who've taken a lot of time and care in taking care of Karen and us and I while we're here. So we're really enjoying ourselves, and we've had amazing, amazing dumplings every day while we've been here. My goal today is to summarize for you in the next 50 minutes or so the results that our lab has produced over the last 30 years, which outline a couple of basic operating principles about how your brain, your human brain, in conversation with your body and the surrounding world, creates your mind. So, a small topic for a Wednesday afternoon. I've divided the lecture into 3 parts. The first part is necessarily longer than the other 2. This is by design. So when we get to the end, I don't want you worrying that every section is going to be that long, because it won't be. And to start, I want to acknowledge several generations of students and postdocs and visiting scholars who contributed to the work that I'm going to present today. And I should also point out, as we have already heard, that our lab has 2 other directors, Dr. Karen Quigley, who's very graciously accompanied me here today, and Dr. Jordan Terrio. He's the big guy in the plaid there. He's joined our lab as the 3rd director. And I want to acknowledge also the generous funding agencies that make it possible for me to be here with you this afternoon. The work that I'm going to present is really work that we've done collaboratively in our lab and also with other collaborators around the world. So I'm just the channel. For more than a century, scientists have been searching for the simple objective markers of emotion in facial movements, in bodily changes, in vocalizations, in the brain. And after conducting thousands of studies, have we actually discovered these simple objective markers? I see some smiles, so you know the answer is no, we have not. Instead, we discovered something else, that we've been asking the wrong questions the entire time. Sometimes in science, progress is not answering questions, it's learning to ask better questions. And that's what I'm hoping that we will do for the rest of this lecture. So I'm going to illustrate for you what the business problem is here with a very simple, one simple example. If you take a look at this person, people often assume that she's sad or maybe grieving or maybe very tired. But actually, this is my daughter, Sophia, from 10 years ago when we were at the Chocolate Museum in Cologne, Germany. She is on her 2nd chocolate drink. And I can assure you that what she is experiencing here is a profound and deep sense of pleasure. Kind of like yesterday when we went for hot chocolate, that really nice place. This little sweetie is also experiencing pleasure. And so the lesson here is that people move their faces in very different ways during instances of the same emotion. And this finding, same emotion, different patterns of signals, is also true for physiological patterns in the body, vocal acoustics, and even patterns of neural activity. Same emotion, different patterns of signals. Now, when we just view this little guy's eyebrow region, his expression looks as if he might be scowling in anger. He's scrunching his eyebrows there. And in fact, a scowl often symbolizes anger in Western culture. And in fact, this image here was generated by generative AI when I prompted it to show me a person who was expressing anger. And actually, I asked it, show me a person who's irritated. Show me a person who's slightly frustrated. This is what I got every single time. There's a reason why, and I think people, for example, often see this face on the left here as angry when it's viewed out of context. But this is actually a picture from 2006. This is Jim Webb when he won the senatorial race in the US state of Virginia. I won't get into the politics, but he returned the control of the Senate to the Democrats, which doesn't mean anything to you, but it means a lot to me and Karen. I can assure you, he is not angry. So as you can clearly see, this is not an angry guy. So people not only move their faces in different ways during instances of the same emotion, they can move their faces in exactly the same way in instances of different emotions. And again, this pattern we see in no matter what we measure, whether it's in the body or on the face or in the brain and so on. So there are some parts of the brain that show very similar patterns of signaling across lots of different emotions. A couple of years ago, I saw this face on X, formerly Twitter. Someone fed it to an emotion AI program which determined with a high degree of confidence that this guy was expressing anger. But take a look. So when an algorithm detects a scowl, even at very, very high confidence, it's not detecting anger. And AI algorithms currently mistakenly equate the detection, or I would say conflate, the detection of facial movements with inferences about the emotional meaning of those movements. So how can it be that a scowl, for example, can sometimes be anger and sometimes be joy or happiness and can sometimes be whatever that was? This is the business problem that we have to solve scientifically here. A set of physical signals like a scowl can have many different emotional meanings. And on the flip side, a word referring to an emotion like anger refers to a flexible category, biological category, filled with diverse situated instances. A recent meta-analysis showed that people scowl in anger about 35% of the time, which is more than chance. And it gets you a very good publication in a journal. But that means that 65% of the time, people are doing something else that's meaningful with their face. They might laugh in anger. They might cry in anger. They might sit silently and plot the demise of their enemy in anger, particularly in a faculty meeting. Oh, come on, that was funny. I thought that was funny. Anyways, and about, you can feel, anger can feel pleasant. It doesn't always feel unpleasant. Your blood pressure can go up in anger or go down or stay the same. This is true for every emotion category that's ever been studied. And there's more than one brain state for anger. And so these kinds of observations challenge the conventional scientific wisdom that anger is a universal pattern triggered by a simple dedicated circuit in your brain. So an emotion like anger is actually a category. It's a population of variable instances within a person across situations. And it's not like what you're doing with your face or your body is random, right? It's situated. It's situated, meaning it's structured by the context that you are in. And that context, of course, is the external world, the situation that you're in, but you also carry around with you a context all the time. That is your body. From your brain's perspective, that's a context that you can't ever leave at home. And the state of your body, it turns out, is very important to brain function. So when it comes to emotion, variation is the norm. And our question is really, how does a brain produce this structured variation in action and in lived experience when creating emotion? How does your brain deal with all this structured variation in other people around you? How do you know when a scowl is anger or when somebody is just concentrating really hard? And what happens when things go wrong? These are the business problems that science has to solve. And to answer them, our lab did something very different. So in psychology and in neuroscience, people usually start with the category. We call it a folk category because it exists in a culture. So that would be the category of memory or the category of emotion or the category of perception. They start with the category and then they go searching for the biological basis of the category. We flipped it. We flipped that question and we said, okay, how does a brain like ours evolve? How does it develop? How is it structured anatomically? And then we can ask, given our ecology that we live in and the structure and function of our human bodies, how does a brain like that think and feel and perceive? And this approach leads to very, very different set of hypotheses about and basic insights about the basic operating principles of a brain and how that brain creates a mind. And we're just going to cover 3 of those today. So we started with this question: what is your brain's most important job? Is it to think? Is it to feel? Is it to sense the world around you? The answer to this question lies in evidence from 550 million years ago. So we have to go back 550 million years, give or take, to a world that was ruled by creatures who have no brains. Kind of like now, except back then, creatures didn't really need brains. For example, this little guy is an amphioxus. Its body is tiny. It has very few simple organs, internal organs. It doesn't have a heart or a GI, a stomach or intestines that move. It doesn't have lungs or anything like that. Very, very simple organs. It has virtually no systems to sense the outside world. No eyes, no ears, no sense of smell. And also, these little guys have no brains because they don't need a brain to survive. And they have survived, actually, for over 500 million years in the same niche, pretty much unchanged, or with very little change. But over evolutionary time, animals' bodies got larger and larger. These bodies had more internal visceral systems to coordinate, systems that shuttle nutrients around, like oxygen and glucose, systems to eliminate waste. And animals also evolved new sensory systems for the first time, like eyes, and a lateral line system to sense the world around them, like in the water, like a shark, basically. And these sensory systems brought signals to the brain that perturbed those, brought signals to the body that perturbed those inner visceral systems. And in short, animals, this is the point at which animals evolved a brain. Because as bodies become more and more complicated, they also need a central command center to regulate them and coordinate them efficiently. And that is fundamentally what your brain is. So if you consider right now, as you listen to this talk, your very own central command center, your brain, is regulating your extremely complicated body. As you listen to me talk, your brain is also supervising over 600 muscles. It is balancing dozens of hormones and chemicals that are coursing through your blood, which is pumping at about 4 to 5 liters a minute through your body. At the same time, your brain is regulating the energy of billions of cells, including its own. It's directing other organs as they digest food, excrete waste, and fight illness. The scientific name for all of this drama is allostasis. But we can think of this regulation metaphorically. It's like running a budget for your body. This budget tracks water and salt and oxygen and glucose and other resources as you gain and lose them throughout the day. The physiologists Peter Sterling and Simon Laughlin make the point about allostasis this way. They write, the core task of all brains is to regulate an organism's internal milieu, the internal environment of the body, by anticipating the needs of the body and preparing to meet those needs before they arise. Correspondingly, as your brain is regulating and coordinating the systems of your body, it is also predictively modeling the sensory state of your body, a process called interoception. Now, interoception has become a very, very popular scientific topic in psychology and neuroscience. Some people define interoception as an awareness of your physical sensations, like how you might sense your heartbeat beating, for example. But interoception is more than that. It's the brain's predictive modeling of the sensory changes that result from allostasis. And these sensory changes support allostasis, support the brain's regulation of the body, in the same way that somatosensory signals of touch and so on support skeletal motor movements. It's very, very similar. You can think about your mood, or what scientists sometimes call affect, as a general allostatic barometer. So your brain modeling of the sensory state of your body, interoception, manifests itself as simple feelings of pleasure, displeasure, comfort, discomfort, fatigue, or energy. Mood is kind of like a quick and dirty summary of your metabolic status without much detail. Mood doesn't indicate to you why you are feeling the way you do, just that it tells you something very general, very simple. It's like a low-dimensional projection of this very, very high-dimensional sensory state that's occurring inside your body. And at this point, I think it's really worth pointing out that mood is not emotion. So because your brain is always regulating your body, it's always modeling the sensory state of the body, mood is always with you, every moment of your life, whether you're emotional or not. So mood is a property of consciousness, even when you're not emotional, and even when your mood is not in the forefront of your awareness. So when you're feeling pretty good, you have a good degree of energy, you're feeling pretty pleasant, allostasis is probably going pretty well. And when you feel like crap, when you're tired or you're distressed, allostasis is probably less efficient, and you might be running some kind of deficit, energy deficit. It might mean, so negative mood might mean something's wrong, but it also might just mean that you're doing something really hard, like maybe you're exercising, or maybe you're learning something new. Maybe you're dealing with persistent uncertainty. These are all very expensive things for a brain to do. Negative mood could simply mean that you're sleep deprived, or jet-lagged. So here are some examples of why understanding something about the brain's most important job changes our understanding of human nature. First, you can think about a depressed brain as a brain that is dealing with some kind of catastrophic metabolic deficit, a bankrupt brain that is attempting to curb spending severely, because that's what the symptoms of depression are. They are the consequences of a brain that is attempting to reduce its metabolic burden. There might be an actual metabolic issue in the body that the brain is attempting to deal with, like an illness or systemic inflammation. That is, you could have an autoimmune disease, for example. It could be that the energy needs of the body are just hard to predict. For example, like during the late luteal phase of the menstrual cycle in women, or during adolescence, or during menopause. Or it could be that the brain mistakenly believes that there's a metabolic problem in the body, and it lacks the resources to update its model. So it believes it's making predictions that there's some kind of metabolic problem, and it's attempting to reduce energy expenditures based on that belief. Another implication, evidence repeatedly indicates that you will be healthier and live years longer if you have close, trusting relationships with other people. And the evidence indicates you will also die several years earlier if you are persistently lonely or alone. And the reason why is that, or one reason why, is that trusted friends and loved ones provide you with metabolic savings. They help ease your brain's allostatic burden. So your brain isn't just regulating your own body, it's also, unbeknownst to you, regulating other people too. And you are regulated by them, for better or for worse. For example, exposure to stress, social stress, within 2 hours of eating a meal makes your metabolism less efficient. If you experience social stress within 2 hours of a meal, it's as if you ate 104 more calories than you actually ate. That's how much inefficiency there is. So if you're dealing with stress on a daily basis, that my friends, adds up to 11 extra pounds in a year. Meaning you could eat exactly the same food as you did last year, but if you are dealing with persistent social stress, meaning your brain believes that there's a big metabolic outlay that's required in order to deal with other people, you will, even if you eat the same foods as you did before, you'll gain 11 pounds in a year. I try to remind, people often ask me, like, do you use your own research in your own life? And I think I do most of the time, but not when I'm reading the newspaper in the morning while I'm eating breakfast. Yeah, especially now. This is the kind of finding that as a scientist, I love it because it's so counterintuitive, but as a person, I find it really horrifying that I could be eating very healthfully, but still, it's not having the effect that I want. And when you lose someone that you love, it often feels like you've lost a part of yourself because, in fact, you have. You've lost someone who has tended your body budget, and you feel that loss physically. You feel it. So how much of the brain is involved with allostasis? Well, it turns out there's a lot. Here I'm showing you some colored blobs, which are the cortical architecture, that is the architecture in your cerebral cortex that's responsible for coordinating and regulating your body. These findings result from 4 studies of over 700 participants in which we mapped the brain system for allostasis. And this architecture contains 2 intrinsic brain networks, that is, networks that are present in the brain, architecture that is present in the brain in red and purple. I'm displaying them here, and their overlap, which is in green. And I want to point out these colors depict connectivity. They depict parts of the brain that are firing together in synchrony and that share information with signals from the body. And for any neuroscientists in the audience, you will recognize these as the default mode motif, network motif, and the salience network motif. These are very, very popular networks. They are studied quite a bit for a whole bunch of different reasons. The overlap that you see in green, where these networks overlap, these are members of what is called the rich club, which means that these are the most connected regions throughout the entire brain, and they are responsible, they are considered to be the kind of backbone of neural communication in the brain. So the backbone of neural communication in your brain is responsible in part for regulating your body. Now these results I'm presenting to you are exactly the same as the ones I showed you before, but here I'm projecting the findings into the volume of the brain because I want to show you the subcortical connections. And when I present it this way, you can see that this allostatic, this system of brain regions that's important for regulating and coordinating your body is not only widely distributed throughout the cerebral cortex, but it also includes midbrain and brainstem structures that regulate your autonomic nervous system, your immune system, your endocrine system. So these are the brainstem regions that control and coordinate your heart, your lungs, your gut, and so on and so forth. This system also involves the hippocampus, which I'm showing you here on its longitudinal axis, sort of like the hippocampus kind of runs like along your temporal lobe here. The hippocampus, scientists study the hippocampus to study memory and to study visual spatial navigation. They don't study it usually to learn something about allostasis or interoception. They don't study it to learn how the brain is regulating the body. But it turns out the hippocampus, if you look at its connections, is very, very, very important for the regulation of the body. And in fact, right now, Karen and I are involved with writing a paper that explains and hypothesizes how memory and navigation probably arise from the regulation of the body. So some of our psychological functions that we think about, like memory, are not independent of the regulation of the body. That's probably why we have a memory, is the general idea. Also, part of this system is the cerebellum, which scientists for many years have studied as part of skeletal motor movement. So here I'm showing a horizontal slice of the cerebellum, which if I, took my brain and kind of cut it here and popped off the top and cleaned away all the blood. Come on, that was funny. Yeah, okay. You would see a cross-section, and what I've done there is just color the areas of the cerebellum that are important for allostasis. So whatever these brain regions are doing, psychologically speaking, they are also regulating your body in every moment of your life. And so we could ask, well, what are these brain regions doing, psychologically speaking? And the answer is pretty much everything. These networks are not only in continuous conversation with your body, but they also participate in pretty much every psychological phenomenon that has ever been studied. Here, this is a summary of more than 6,000 published papers from more than 10 years ago. So these networks, this default mode on the red one here, and this one here, and this salience network motif, these networks are involved, they've been studied, there are thousands of papers on these networks looking at their role in psychological phenomena. And what findings like this really reinforce is the observation that thinking and feeling and perceiving do not have different dedicated brain parts. But that is a talk, that's a different talk. I'm not giving that talk today. But the idea that a psychological function is localized in a particular part of the brain, not a well-supported claim. And I'll just, for now, offer you one last implication for why it's important to know what your brain's most important job is. And here we're going to zoom in on a midbrain structure called the periaqueductal gray, which I've outlined here in red. Periaqueductal gray is a very small cylinder or tube that wraps around the cerebral aqueduct in your brain, midbrain. And it's very, very hard to study in humans because it's surrounding this tube that has liquid in it, cerebrospinal fluid. The PAG, or periaqueductal gray, is supposed to contain fight or flight circuits that are activated when you are threatened. So how many of you have heard that you have a lizard brain buried deep inside your brain? Anybody? Yeah. You don't. But your so-called lizard brain supposedly contains the circuits for fight and flight. And during the COVID pandemic, there was a lot written, at least in the United States, about how everyone was exhausted because their fight and flight circuits were overworked because they were so threatened all the time. Well, we surveyed the known anatomical connectivity of the PAG, and we realized these circuits are probably just regulating your autonomic nervous system all the time, like your heart, your lungs, and so on. And we thought, well, we're going to try to test this. But you can't test it with standard brain imaging. Like a standard magnet isn't powerful enough to really see what's happening in the PAG because it's this tiny little structure and there's a lot of noise because it's surrounded by this tube basically that has fluid in it. So instead, we scan people using ultra-high resolution fMRI, which uses a 7 Tesla powered magnet. Normally people use 3 Tesla, so it's a very, very powerful magnet. And what you're seeing there is actually a structural image from a 7 Tesla scan. So it's not exactly as good as an X-ray, but it's close. It's actually really good. And then while we were scanning subjects, we gave them a really, really, really simple memory task called an N-back task. Now, I know a lot of you are not psychologists, but I am curious, how many of you have heard of an N-back task? Great, okay, just you. All right, well, I'm going to describe to you this memory task, and what I want you to pay attention to is how absolutely trivial this task is, okay? So subjects are lying stock still in the scanner, and they're looking at a screen, and we show them a letter. And then, a few seconds later, we show them another letter. And we say, is this the same letter or a different letter than the one you just saw? Same or different? Different. Good job. How about now? Same or different than the letter you just saw? Same. There you go. That's the task. Trivial. It's easier than remembering a phone number, which for some of us at a certain age is actually a very stressful task. But there is no threat here, no threat. Nonetheless, this task gave the periaqueductal gray a real workout, and notably, subjects' heart rate changed and also their breathing rate changed during their memory. So findings like these suggest that there are no fight or flight circuits in your brain. In moments of threat, PAG neurons are working really, really hard. They're regulating the heart and the lungs and so on really, really well, really hard. But these neurons are not for threat. And the notion that they are dedicated, these neurons, for fight or flight, for anger or fear, was what we call a laboratory-induced localization. What do I mean, laboratory-induced localization? If you want a publication and you're a neuroscientist, you want to drive those neurons really hard so you can observe them. So what do? You expose your animals to threat, and then they drive those that drives the neurons really hard, and then you go, oh, these are neurons that are dedicated to responding to threat. No, 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 my friends, they are not. They are regulating your nervous system all the time, even during mundane tasks. Even now, in you, and I'm assuming this is not a threatening experience for you. We published this paper last year. This is a revolutionary paper because it takes about 50 years of neuroscience research and sets it aside. So, lesson number 1. Your brain's most important job is not thinking. It is not feeling. It is not even seeing or hearing or sensing the world in any way. Your brain's most important job is regulating your very, very complicated body. And scientists largely ignore the body when they're concerned about the mind, in part because we are unaware of all the drama going on inside us. Like right now, you have an orchestra of events occurring in your body that you are unaware of. And everything your brain does, psychologically speaking, it is doing in the service of regulating your body, even though you don't experience yourself that way. I don't experience myself that way. I don't experience every hug I give, every insult I bear as having anything to do with my body, but it does. And so an important implication here is that what we call physical illness, like heart disease or diabetes, and what we call mental illness, like depression or anxiety, have a common energetic or allostatic basis, right? That there are metabolic issues in all of these diseases, whether they're mental or physical. And I would just want to point out for the record, I'm not reducing everything to energy regulation. Like, I'm not saying this is the one thing that you need to care about when you're trying to understand how a brain builds a mind while it's communicating with the body. I'm just highlighting energy regulation and allostasis because it's a key influence that's usually ignored when we're trying to understand the biological basis of mental life. So how does a brain perform allostasis? Well, as we've already said, your brain is predicting the needs of your body in advance, your energy needs, and attempting to meet those needs or preparing to meet those needs before they arise. The most efficient way to regulate any system is to predict what will happen in the system and then correct those predictions when necessary. So this idea that the brain is predicting and correcting is called predictive processing. And as of today, I would say maybe not 1,000 papers have been published, but every day there's just more and more papers being published in neuroscience, in signal processing, in anatomy, in computational modeling. And I would say predictive processing is a scientific paradigm, to use the phrase from Thomas Kuhn, the historian of science. Or we could call it a broad research tradition, to use the phrase from the philosopher Larry Loudon, meaning there are a lot of different labs with a lot of different research programs, individual research programs, studying how the brain predicts and corrects, predicts and corrects, predicts and corrects. They each have very different hypotheses about how the brain is accomplishing this task. But they all agree, it's a tradition, that they share certain assumptions, and our lab is part of that tradition. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to give you the general gist of the predictive processing tradition, the general idea with our lab's particular spin, and then I'll present you a little bit of evidence. So I'm giving you, this is a cartoon image of what is a highly simplified image of a story of what is actually happening under the hood. And I'm putting up some references here in case you want to read your way through some of the evidence. And also, you can look here. There's some evidence summarized here too. Okay, so. Your brain creates your actions and your experiences first by anticipating the upcoming energy needs of your body and preparing to meet those needs before they arise. So it's making allostatic plans. It's creating a bunch of guesses for what the body should do next, and for each guess, it's also predicting what will be experienced as a consequence. So if your brain is preparing to raise your heart rate, it will also predict certain sensations that will arise in the next moment. And the way that your brain is doing this is basically, as it's making the prediction begins as the motor control signals. So it's preparing to raise your heart rate, maybe, or change your breathing rate, or gush some cortisol into your blood, or turn your head, or move your eyes. It makes these motor plans and copies of these plans, literal copies. So some neurons are sending signals down to the body. Collaterals off those axons are being sent to other parts of the brain as sensory prediction signals of what you will see and hear and feel as a consequence of those movements, should those movements arise. So these guesses are possible futures. They are possible plans for action and the predicted sensory consequences of those actions. Now, predictions are memories, and they're not just any memories. They're memories that are similar to the present in some way. And all of this remembering is happening outside of your awareness. It's not like you have a conscious experience of remembering, but your brain is reinstating patterns, signal patterns from the past. Now, in psychology, a group of things which are similar to each other is a category. So essentially, what your brain is doing is it's creating a category. In every instance, it's creating categories from past experience that are similar to the present in some way. So a category is not a fixed representation that you retrieve like a file from a file drawer. Your brain is constructing categories on the fly, mixing and matching, retrieving, i.e. manifesting or assembling signals from the past as sensory prediction, motor and sensory predictions of what will happen in the moment, in a moment from now. And this, in cognitive science, is called, these are called ad hoc categories because they're happening kind of on the fly, in the moment, in a specific situation. Now, these ad hoc categories are, you can think of them as the neural context for the processing of incoming sensory signals. So you have all of these sensory surfaces on your body, your retina, your cochlea, you've got sensory surfaces in your skin, you've got sensory surfaces in your nose for chemicals. You have sensory surfaces in your body that are sending sensory signals to your brain. These sensory signals, when they arrive to the brain, are made meaningful by the signaling that's already going on there. Those are the prediction signals. The prediction signals are the context, the neural context, that give the sensory signals meaning. And the incoming sensory signals help to select which of those prediction signals is actually going to manifest, is going to gain access to your motor systems to manifest as a set of actions and a set of experiences. So the signals are there. You're not reacting to signals in the world or in your body. The signals are helping to select which of the prediction signals, which of that category of possible futures is going to actually become the future in the next moment. And this is how you create every movement that you make and how you experience yourself in the world. This is how you have the experience of that you are detecting things in the world rather than predicting them and reacting to events in the world. And it's all happening so quickly and under the hood that it feels like that you're reacting to things in an objective world around you, but that is actually not what's happening. So this is how a scowl can be an instance of anger or an instance of pleasure. It's how you can sometimes cry in anger or laugh in anger, and so on. It's how you can look at someone and sometimes experience their scowl as if you are reading an emotion in them. This is how emotions are made. Your brain is essentially constructing a category of past events for emotion. The sensory signals that are constantly streaming to your body, to your brain from your body, are selecting one of those options, and the result is a particular set of movements in your body, of your body, and your experience of yourself in the world. Variation, selection, response. That is the basic operating principle of how prediction works and how the brain, to our best available knowledge, how the brain is regulating the body, how it's performing allostasis. So think about the last time you were thirsty and you drank a glass of water. Within seconds of draining the last drops, you probably felt less thirsty, but here's the really interesting thing. It actually takes 20 minutes for the water to change the osmolarity of your blood and for the corresponding signals to make it to your brain. That means every time you drink a glass of water and you quench your thirst, it's happening 20 minutes too early because the brain hasn't received those signals yet. How does that happen? Well, over your lifetime, your brain has had thousands of opportunities to learn the statistical patterns that certain sensory and motor patterns, like drinking, for example, right? Feeling liquid in your mouth, involved in drinking, quenches your thirst 20 minutes later. And so your brain predicts the sensory features of that felt experience and manifests them before the signals actually get there. And if you don't believe me, take a look at this. So rather than throw a lot of data at you, I thought I would just give you an experience of what prediction feels like, since normally you don't have this experience. So first of all, I'll wager that none of you have ever actually seen in real life electrical towers playing jump rope. But you can understand that this is what's happening in this image, I hope, because your brain was able to combine bits and pieces of memories. So it takes bits and pieces of prior neural assemblies, and it makes a completely novel prediction. It constructs a completely novel neural assembly. This is why you don't walk around being surprised all the time, Because your brain is generative. It can take bits and pieces of the past and combine them to make a novel set of predictions. This is called conceptual combination in cognitive science. But this example also demonstrates another really cool thing about the way your brain predicts, and hopefully gives you an intuition about how you could quench your thirst much quicker than is biologically than is the result of the biological changes in osmolarity. How many of you can hear the towers hit the ground? Right. And how many of you can feel the towers thudding in your chest? Okay, if you can, then this is because your brain is changing the firing of its own sensory neurons in the absence of these sensory signals. Right? You're just looking at the screen and you're taking in visual signals and you're moving your eyes, and on that basis, you can hear something and you can feel something. This is an example of what your brain does. Every time it creates a prediction, predictions are physical. They're not abstractions, they're physical. So this is an example of how your thirst is quenched 20 minutes too early. And I'm going to give you another example, I think, which is even more compelling than this one. But first, I just want to show you, here are some results from a study that we did a few years ago. The colored blobs here now are increases in bold signal. This is the kind of signal that we record during fMRI, so it's related to neural activity. So these subjects have their eyes closed, and they're lying completely still in the scanner, and they're just imagining a scenario, a description, and of an event. There are a bunch of events they're imagining, but these are very short descriptions, right? And imagining is the same as predicting. Prediction signals are the basis of your thoughts, your feelings, your imaginings, your daydreams, your nighttime dreams, and so on. So even though subjects are lying completely still and their eyes are closed, okay, we see an increase in neural activity in the parts of the brain that are important for movement and touch, for vision, this is primary visual cortex, for interoception, that is primary interoceptive cortex, the modeling of the body, and in areas, those midbrain and brainstem areas that control your heart rate, your breathing, your metabolism, your immune system, and so on. So this is evidence that prediction signals are physical. They are manifesting as physical signals. And when a brain is predicting, it begins to construct experiences before the signals from the body arrive. So here we are at the second example of this happening. I want you to take a look. This is a standard traffic light that we have in the United States. Please raise your hand if you see that top light as red. Okay. How about now? Who still sees the top light as red? Right, okay. But here's the really interesting thing. Your experience of red right now is completely caused by prediction signals in your brain. 100%. And I know this for a fact because, well, I'll tell you in a minute why. But basically, you're remembering red. So your brain is remembering red, it's constructing prediction signals, and you are experiencing the consequence of those prediction signals. And I know this because this blue, greenish blue filter here is a cyan filter, and it blocks all wavelengths of light that neurotypical humans typically see as red. It's actually gray. That circle is gray. But you experienced it as red, and maybe now you do again, solely by prediction. You are imagining, remembering, predicting red, and this is your experience. So this is the second lesson. Your brain constructs your experiences, what you see, what you hear, what you feel, as it predictively controls your body. You don't sense things in the world and then evaluate them and then react. your brain controls your body predictively, and in doing so, assembles sensory prediction signals that become your experience of yourself in the world. Our third lesson for today derives from the other two, and that is that your experience of what is outside your head, in the world, and in your own body derives in part from the prediction signals inside your head. And for the most part, your brain does not make itself aware of this ongoing dynamic. So again, I'm going to give you an example that's specially constructed to give you an intuition for how this works, because normally we don't have this experience very often. So if you take a look at this image, right now, who sees black and white blobs? Really? Only some of you? Did people actually see an image here? Does anyone see anything? Sometimes people do. Like one time somebody told me they saw a lobster or a bunny. What's really happening right now is that your brain is searching through your past experiences, issuing thousands and thousands of guesses at once, weighing probabilities, trying to answer the question, what is this most like from my past? Not what is this, but what is this most like, right? It's trying to construct an ad hoc category to reinstate ensembles of signals that are similar in some way to the present. Now, a lot of people, when they look at this, only see black and white blobs. And if that's you, then you are experiencing what philosophers call experiential blindness, meaning your brain can't make a good guess, can't make a good prediction. So now I'm going to cure you of your blindness. And I want to say, in the United States, there are many evangelical churches. And oftentimes, in an evangelical church, these are usually Protestant churches. I now have to step away from the microphone, okay? But a pastor will stand in front of an audience and say, do you want to be cured? Right. And then, so, do you want to be cured? Yes! Can I get an amen? Amen! That was a statement of cultural experience. So, okay. So I'm going to cure you now of your experiential blindness. That is the most gratifying sound that I have that audiences make when I show this image. So it's a bee. And you can see, right, that it has a shiny head, and it has antennas, and it's got a fuzzy bum, and it's got legs, and it's got wings, right? It's a bee. Okay. How many of you now see a bee still? Right. Because your brain has new knowledge to make prediction signals that it didn't have before I showed you that color photograph. Those prediction signals are changing your experience of these visual signals from the screen right now. So you're constructing the image of a bee or parts of a bee even though there is no bee actually present on the screen. Just like you heard the jumping towers when there was no sound and you saw red without the corresponding wavelengths of light. What is on the screen right now is exactly the same as what I showed you a moment ago. The screen hasn't changed. You've changed. You've changed because I gave you an experience, a prior experience that you didn't have, and now you do. And most people, once they see the bee, never can unsee the bee. So we'll test. I'll come back next year. We'll try it again. We'll see. Can you still see the bee? So unbeknownst to you, your brain is, without making itself aware, is also constructing a plan for action, to visceral motor action to regulate the body, and skeletal motor plans to prepare for movement. And if I had you, or maybe Karen had you, hooked up to sensors, and we were measuring your heart rate and your breathing rate and so on, we'd be able to detect those changes. And in fact, psychologists use this all the time. We show people images of crazy things and scary things and pleasant things, and then we measure their cardiovascular response. It's because the brain is predicting that we can do that they can lie completely still, look at an image, and we can make their hearts race. So, everything you do, everything you feel, is a combination of what is in your head, the prediction signals, that your brain is remembering, and those allostatic control signals, and the signals that are outside your head, the sensory present. Physical signals inside your head, which are assembled as an ad hoc category in advance of the sensory signals, are the neural context that gives psychological meaning to those incoming sensory signals. Physical signals don't have inherent psychological meaning. They become psychologically meaningful only in relation to one another. So the raise of an eyebrow, the curl of a lip, the tilt of a head, these movements are physical signals that have no inherent psychological meaning. Your brain makes these signals meaningful as perceptions of other people's emotions in exactly the same way that it creates every experience you have ever had in your entire life. This is how a scowling face can express anger in one situation, or concentration in another situation, or about a bad gas in another situation. This is the relational view of emotional meaning. And signals inside your body derive meaning in exactly the same way. A racing heart can be anxiety or dread when you're waiting for the results of a medical test, or it can be, the racing heart can be excitement when you are on a successful dinner date, or determination when you're taking an exam, or giving a talk on stage in front of hundreds of people you don't know while you're sleep deprived and you're running 5 minutes late. Every action you take, every experience you have is a combination of the remembered past and the sensory present. And for the most part, you remain unaware that this is happening. And that is the third and final lesson for today. But I want to leave you with one final thought, if you'll permit me. I know I'm a little over time, but I want to just leave you with a provocative thought. If every experience you have in your whole life is a combination of prediction signals that are in your brain, the remembered past, and the signals coming from the world and from your body, the sensory present, then what does that mean about the nature of reality? One possibility is that there is an objective reality out there, and that exists separately from us, that we can never detect directly, and that we can only perceive through the lens of our own concepts and categories. Some very famous philosophers and many scientists have held this view and continue to hold this view, right? That's called traditional realism. There's an objective world out there, and we can never know it directly, but it's there. Another more radical possibility is that reality itself is a combination of the remembered past and the sensory present, and that what we call objective reality might not exist in any meaningful sense. This is not the idea that reality is in your head, because that's the polarity that philosophers argued about for really centuries, right? Is reality there objectively in the world, or is it all in your head? And what I'm suggesting to you is that neither of those is the case, that maybe reality exists in relation to us, that reality itself is relational, and this is a very counterintuitive notion, so I just want to give you one example to sort of to sort of prime you to think about this. It's common to assume that objects like this flower, I'll be done in 2 minutes for those of you who are looking at your, I promise, 2 minutes, 2 minutes. Hopefully you'll think the 2 minutes was worth it. It's common sense to assume that objects like this flower exist in the world, in reality separate from us. You can pick a flower, you can buy a flower, you can sometimes eat a flower, you can prick your finger on a flower and you will bleed. Common sense tells us that flowers are objectively real and that that rose is objectively red, and that anybody who can't see that rose as red is colorblind, meaning the color is in the flower and you're just blind to it. But the reality of the red rose as a solid object with a color and a smell and thorns that are sharp depends on the kind of body that you have, the kind of sensory surfaces that you have, the kind of brain that you have. The reality of the flower as a solid red object exists only in relation to you. It's just like saying, a ball, when you throw a ball, it doesn't have velocity. Velocity is in relation to something. If you throw a ball, the velocity of the ball is different if you're comparing the ball to a bird that's flying by or a train that's flying by. Velocity is a property of relations. It's not a property of an object. Color is a property of relations. It's not a property of an object. Solidity is a property of relations, not a property of an object. To an ant, there is no flower. There's just terrain to climb. And to a whale, this is just one of many irrelevant particles in the water. And if you were a creature of subatomic size, that flower would be mostly empty space. It would not exist as a solid object in any meaningful sense to you. The flower is objectively red because neurotypically humans have 3 kinds of cones in our retina. Now there are people who have 4 cones, and when they look, 4 kinds of cones, and when they look at that flower, it is not red. It is some other color. So if neurotypically humans had 4 cones, that flower would not be objectively red. It would be objectively some other color, and those of us with 3 cones who saw the flower as red would be colorblind. So, to claim that the flower is part of one objective reality that is perspective independent, it's just out there, independent of us, is to elevate one perspective, that of neurotypical humans and our biology, to elevate it and call it objective. So we are elevating one perspective over all the others, and we're calling it objective, because we all agree on it. And this is the kind of thinking that may be responsible for some of the conditions that we find most metabolically taxing in our lives. And now I am done. Thank you for your attention.